Okay, so let's dig into this. We're doing a deep dive on a situation around the talk show, The View. It seems like the spark wasn't just something said on the show itself, but one host apparently took a shot at Bill Maher, and then, like, right after, that same host was off the show for a bit.
Yeah, and that timing, that sequence, it really kicked things off, especially online. Lots of people jumping straight to, you know, karma. But what came next was, well, a much bigger critique, really, not just from Maher himself, but Megyn Kelly also jumped in, both from their own shows.
Exactly. They didn't even need to be at the table on The View to make some pretty pointed comments based on our sources. So that's our goal here, right? To
Yeah.
pull from the sources that detail what they actually said. We want to get at the specific things Maher and Kelly pointed out about the show's format, the dynamic between the hosts, how they handle discussions.
And sort of why these critiques from the outside seem to land so hard,
Right.
We're going straight to the accounts of what they said, trying to get that clear picture without all the noise around it.
Perfect. Sounds like a plan. Let's dive into what the sources lay out for us.
Okay, so the sources kick off with that initial moment we mentioned, the comment about Bill Maher on The View, then the host is temporarily gone, and bam, the whole karma narrative explodes online.
And Maher's first reaction, according to these sources, was to hit that karma idea head on. He basically said flat out, there's no such thing as karma.
Right. He argued, life is random, sometimes it's just chaotic, and he even used the word hilarious in a dark way. The sources mentioned he gave this, really graphic example, a big game hunter getting trampled by an elephant and then eaten by lions.
Whoa.
Yeah, but his point wasn't good. He deserved it.
Yeah.
It was more like, see, life is just absurdly random sometimes.
So it wasn't really about, wanting revenge or anything. He just found the idea of cosmic justice in this case kind of darkly funny. And the sources also say he tied this popular idea of karma, the American version anyway, to a logical fallacy.
Yeah, post hoc ergo propter hoc. I mean, the classic fallacy, right? Just because B happened after A doesn't mean A caused B.
Okay, makes sense. He just wasn't buying the cause and effect here.
No. And the sources also mentioned he said he was particularly fired up. Apparently, this specific host had been, in his words, throwing insults and nonsense his way pretty regularly before this whole thing.
Okay. So there was some history there, which adds context. But it sounds like he didn't just leave it at the karma thing. The sources show this kind of opened the door for him to launch into bigger criticisms of The View itself.
Oh, definitely. It became a much broader critique. And one of the first things the sources really highlight is his focus on their track record with facts, specifically legal corrections.
Legal corrections, and the sources got specific on the number.
Very specific. They state not one, not two, not three, but 4 legal corrections. And interestingly, that apparently only 3 of those were actually acknowledged on camera.
Oh, okay. So he's using that as like evidence of maybe sloppiness or something.
Exactly. And he also hit their fact-checking during the show. Said that they tried to fact-check only one side and then kind of backed down or cowed, as the source puts it, when their fact-checks got fact-checked.
So the critique is painting a picture of maybe not just errors, but a biased approach. And that seems to tie into how he described the show overall. He didn't see it as a real debate, did he?
Not at all, based on the sources. He called it synchronized indignation, or another phrase was televised temper tantrum.
Synchronized indignation
Yeah.
paints the picture.
His point was basically everyone just gets outraged together on cue, like it's almost choreographed.
Did the sources give examples of what he meant by that, like specific moments?
They did. The critiques mentioned Sonny Hostin comparing the January 6th riot to the Holocaust and slavery.
Okay, yeah, that's a strong comparison. Any others?
There was also the reaction when Alyssa Farah Griffin brought up that Trump went to a slain police officer's funeral while Biden attended a podcast taping. The sources described the reaction from one host as just instant fury. And the summary was kind of no facts, just vibes. Purely emotional reaction.
Gotcha. And then there was the Maggie hat comparison. That seemed like a big one in the critiques.
Huge. The sources say Maher really zeroed in on the argument made on the show that wearing a Maggie hat is like wearing a swastika sticker.
And how did he push back on that, according to the sources?
Well, his argument was essentially, look, you can hate Donald Trump, that's fine, but you can't hate everybody who likes him. He called that specific comparison absurd and dangerous. And he made the point, that's half the country we're talking about. The sources noted he said something like, he doesn't want to live in a country where he hates half the people in it.
Yeah, right. So framing it not just as political disagreement, but as something more divisive and harmful, this kind of blanket demonization. The sources also say Maher took issue with the show calling itself a safe space for women's voices.
Yeah, he definitely didn't see it that way, according to these accounts. Called it a toxic clique.
Mm.
Said it wasn't empowerment, it was more like daytime TV mean girls with microphones.
Ouch. Did the sources mention any examples to back that up from his perspective?
Yeah, the critiques apparently pointed to people like Megyn McCain and Candace Cameron Bure leaving the show. The argument presented was that disagreement is treated as dangerous,
Mm.
and that even, liberal hosts who dare to have a slightly different take get shut down. The sources used the phrase icy death stares.
So the critique wasn't just about conservative voices, but any dissent, really. Like, it's about conformity more than dialogue.
That seems to be the gist of it, yeah.
Yeah.
It enforces a certain line.
How did the sources kind of sum up Maher's whole approach here? His style?
They described him as a wrecking ball with a grin, using comedy like a scalpel, sharp and precise. And his final take on the show. The sources quote him calling it a live-action version of a Facebook comment section. Basically, loud, messy, and impossible to take seriously.
Okay, that's quite the takedown. Delivered in his typical Maher style, but then the sources shift to Maher and Kelly, who also chimed in, but apparently with a very different vibe.
Totally different approach, yeah. The sources described her critique as more like a truth grenade, thrown from the sidelines, but with pinpoint accuracy. The big thing the sources emphasized was her tone. She was reportedly calm, not yelling, just sort of methodically ripping into the show. Very precise.
And what was her main point? Based on the sources, did it echo Maher's criticism about the dynamic?
Oh, absolutely. She called it an overproduced echo chamber pretending to be a talk show. Very similar theme. Her take was that the hosts aren't really debating. It's more like a scripted game of synchronized outrage, a kind of one-view-fits-all mentality.
So if a guest comes on with a different view?
They get shut down instantly, according to her critique. She also apparently called out what she saw as an endless cycle of virtue signaling.
And the sources mentioned she had some pretty sharp comparisons, too.
Oh, yeah. She said it's where logic goes to die. Compared it to auditing a class where the teachers never opened the textbook, or maybe just barely skimmed it 5 minutes before airtime.
Wow, that's harsh, implying they're not really prepared or informed.
Pretty much. And interestingly, the sources say Kelly also brought up the legal corrections, the 4 corrections.
Huh. Why do you think both of them latched on to that specific detail based on these critiques?
Well, it seems like in the critiques, it's presented as sort of concrete proof, right?
Yeah.
Backing up their claims about carelessness or lack of real factual grounding. Kelly specifically called the hosts careless about that.
Undermines the idea of serious discussion if you're constantly having to issue corrections.
Exactly. And she also talked about how they handle disagreements when they do happen.
What did the sources say about that?
That they try to spin debates into soap opera level melodrama. And she got really specific about the hosts too, according to the sources. Very individual critiques.
Oh, really? Like, what did the sources report she said about Sunny Hostin or Alyssa Farah Griffin?
Okay, so for Hostin, the critique cited Kelly describing her as acting like her law degree makes her morally untouchable. And for Griffin, she was called the so-called conservative, who seemed about as convincing as a vegan at a Texas barbecue.
A vegan at a Texas barbecue. That's memorable. Specific.
Yeah, and the sources mentioned descriptions for Joy Behar, too, and Whoopi Goldberg calling Whoopi half moderator, half napper.
Wow. So really direct personal characterizations there, but the sources keep stressing her tone while doing this.
Right, calm. Dismantling it with, the sources said, sniper-level accuracy and precision. The argument was apparently made that her one monologue had more impact than like a whole week of The View.
So her core message, as the sources captured it,
That intelligence doesn't need volume. Shouting woke slogans, staging these emotional performances, that doesn't substitute for actual debate. She saw the show's format as something that basically punishes any voice that steps off the emotional script. Famously called it high school with microphones.
high school with microphones, yeah.
Where, real empowerment means letting someone disagree without a meltdown. That was a key line highlighted in the sources.
That really gets to the heart of the critique about the atmosphere there. And she also called it a badly managed group chat with cameras.
Yeah, another one of those very vivid characterizations. So you have these two critiques landing, right? Maher with the humor and the broad swings, Kelly with this calm, precise dissection.
And the key thing, which the sources highlight, is neither of them went on the show to say this stuff. They did it from their own platforms, from outside.
Right. And apparently, according to the sources, The View didn't really hit back directly, not in a big way. which, the critiques interpreted that silence. They suggested the points maybe hit a nerve too deep to ignore, but too painful to address.
Hmm. So the combined message from both of them, summing up the sources, is that the show is what? A performance.
More or less,
Okay.
a spectacle.
Yeah.
A carefully choreographed chaos machine that mistakes noise for truth and emotion for argument. That's how the sources synthesized it.
And there was that analogy about gasoline.
Yeah, that their arguments were like gasoline, and the show's own contradictions lit the match. Proving, the critique argued, that you don't always need to show up in person to burn the place down.
That definitely underscores the power of outside criticism when it resonates.
Yeah, it really makes you think about, the difference between being on a platform and commenting about it.
Absolutely. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up what we've pulled from the sources here. Bill Maher, Megyn Kelly, both delivered these really pointed critiques of The View. They hit on similar themes, perceived lack of real debate, too much emotion over substance, how dissent is handled, this sort of one-view-fits-all approach they described.
And they use specific examples from the show itself, like the legal corrections, certain on-air comments, to back up their arguments.
Right, and looking at these critiques, as reported in our sources, it does give you a lens, doesn't it? A way to think about how these public conversations play out on TV today.
Definitely. It raises all sorts of questions, like what's the line between healthy debate and just emotional performance? How
Yeah.
important is factual rigor? What happens in these group dynamics on TV? Is it real discussion or
Yeah.
something else?
Yeah, groupthink versus genuine dialogue, it's a constant tension.
So maybe the final thought to leave folks with, coming out of this deep dive into the sources. If these big voices, Maher and Kelly, could apparently land such effective critiques from the outside, just by pointing to patterns and things happening within the show itself, what does that suggest about how we perceive authenticity on TV now? How much of televised talk is performance versus real exchange? And how do we as viewers, find the real substance amidst all the spectacle?
That's a really good question to chew on. How do you navigate it all? Definitely something to think about.